Hello, DevOps fans, and welcome to the show. My name is Bret. This is my live show every week for the last million years that we've been doing this. I don't even know how. We're about to hit 200 episodes, so however many years that is. But thanks for being here. I was on holiday for the last 3 weeks, touring around Europe, checking out some friends. I'm going to have a couple of those friends on the show in the next couple of months. A couple Docker captains, Docker staff that just are scattered all around the European Union. And so we are going to focus on Kubernetes security, but first I want to give you a couple of heads ups. If you didn't watch this live, come back on Thursdays. I have guests usually, and we talk about Docker and Kubernetes and container tooling. And we ask questions, which is why we're doing this live. So you can ask questions of my guests, learn about the tools and ideas that we tend to talk about on this show. And this turns into a podcast. So links below. I'm going to say that several times. You can, of course, like and subscribe on YouTube and all that stuff. But if you want to listen to audio only versions, we edit this thing down and we put it in a podcast. So you can listen on your commute or like me when you're washing dishes or doing yard work. So you can do that. Also, we have so many other things that have happened recently this year. The loot box has launched. So my merch store, my swag store is now live. We started with 4 designs, I think it's at least 4 designs, and all sorts of stuff, mugs, t-shirts, sweatshirts. It's all around the lifestyle of dev conferences. Really, I basically made the t-shirts I wanted to wear to conferences. And I've actually got a few more coming before KubeCon. If you're going to be in Detroit, by the way, for KubeCon this year in October, let me know. Find me on Twitter. Find me in our Discord server. By the way, you can check that out right there, devops.fan. That'll take you to the Discord server. We got 10,000 people in there talking about DevOps every day, all day. We're probably going to have a meetup at KubeCon. So if you're going to be there, let me know, and we'll start figuring out a way to get everybody organized. Maybe we'll do some sort of happy hour or lunch together or something. That'll be fun. So you can check out the loot box. We've got more designs coming, and of course that's now here in the YouTube store. So you can see all of my stuff there for sale. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. We're actually bringing on more designers and figuring out how to split the few dollars we make on every t-shirt that you would buy from us. Also, there's courses. Of course, that's how I'm here. I'm a course creator. I talk about my consulting and all of the stuff I've learned over the last almost decade of Docker and Kubernetes. And you can buy those courses with special coupons below. Lastly, today was Docker's All Hands, their 6th All Hands over the last 3 years. They have these quarterly events, and if you didn't attend that earlier today, which is kind of wrapping up now, they didn't really announce anything hugely new, but there are some new experimental features. If you update your Docker desktop, new experimental features are happening, and there's a new extension which I just released to my Patreon. So if you didn't know about my Patreon, you can follow all my updates there. This is a bunch of stuff I'm making you do right now. But if you're not on Patreon, you can do it totally free and get essentially 1 or 2 emails a week. Just scroll down and click the follow button. If you'd like to join our monthly High Fivers hangout, every month on Discord, a group of us get together. We talk about our projects, about what we're doing in DevOps, and we just chit-chat like a water cooler hangout. You can do that for $5 a month, and we just had it 2 days ago. Or was it yesterday? It was yesterday, and we talked about a whole bunch of stuff. Last month, we talked a lot about hiring and jobs in DevOps engineering and what that's like, and this month, we had a whole range of topics around education. How do we learn? How do we keep up to date? And I would recommend that. It's actually a lot of fun, and I'm glad people are coming and finding use with that. But anyway, back to the Docker thing. If you just go check out Docker's YouTube channel, all the stuff you may have missed in the All Hands today will be on their YouTube channel coming soon. And one of those things that we talked about on there was my backup tool. So in case you didn't know, a couple of years ago, I had this idea about backup, and it is essentially an idea of how to back up, restore, and share volumes. And volumes in your local Docker, right? Like maybe you want to back them up. Maybe you want to send a copy of the database to one of your coworkers. Well, Docker has now made an official extension exactly from that project. So Felipe and a couple other people in the Docker team ran with this idea. I'm so excited about it. I owe nothing there's no applause to me because I didn't do any of the work. They did all the work. They made this great extension, and it just launched last week. So definitely go check that out. You have to have the latest Docker desktop version, but you can now back up, clone, share, export, import, restore all of your volumes right inside the Docker desktop GUI. It's something I think we've needed for years now, and at least we now have it for local Docker desktop. So anyway, that's all the announcements I have today. I'm actually excited because we're going to talk about some tools that one of my favorite tools, actually. And we're lucky enough to have on the show today the ARMO CEO and Co-Founder, also the creator of the Kubescape project, Shauli Rozen. Thank you so much for being on the show. Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I was on mute there. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So you're calling in from Tel Aviv. This is the headquarters, right, of ARMO?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and actually, you're maybe not in Tel Aviv, but you're somewhere in Israel. And the focus of your company has been on Kubernetes the whole time, right? Like Kubernetes security, stuff like that.
Yes, that's true. We've been working on Kubernetes security for the past 3 years, and it took us a lot of experience and to see a lot of things happening in order to get to where we are now, and our strategy and the way we do it today via open source, basically.
Yeah. And I learned about you from the Kubescape project, which we're going to get into. We're going to talk a lot about today. But Kubescape was something that I desperately needed a few years ago when I first found it, because I needed something to help me understand the state of my Kubernetes cluster, and specifically in terms of configuration and security, stuff like that. Because we've had this thing called Docker Bench for Docker, but I didn't really know of any tools. And I was also concerned about my YAML, and is my YAML implementing proper Kubernetes specifications? Yeah. Right, because there's a big difference between it works and it works well and with good security defaults, right?
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly how we came to Kubescape. We've been working on Kubernetes security for a while. We spoke with so many CISOs on, because you do Kubernetes security, you go to the CISO because that's kind of like the initial reaction. But the actual responses that we always got is that we need to get the development team involved or my DevOps team involved if you're talking about Kubernetes security, because the CISOs were so far away from the actual management and operations of Kubernetes. And after a few conversations like that, we basically said, okay, let's do it for the developers. Let's go directly to the developers and let's help the developers. And that's where we started to think about open sourcing, because once you want to go to developers, I think transparency makes a lot of difference. And also, I think the idea of creating a community and getting the community involved and building the thing with you has proven very, very helpful. And then also in terms of priorities, right? You talk about Kubernetes security and you speak about misconfigurations and vulnerabilities, and basically the posture of my cluster is the base thing that you want to fix and that you want to make sure is okay. Now, security is much wider than that, but you need to start somewhere. And that's what we've decided to do. We started to create an open source project that is aiming at becoming the first end-to-end open source Kubernetes security platform. We are starting with what we call KSPM, Kubernetes Security Posture Management, looking at the vulnerabilities, configuration, role-based access control, excessive privileges you might have in your cluster, because that's the low-hanging fruit for the DevOps when they get started. That's the most pressing one and the easiest one and the quickest time to value. And that's why we decided to start there.
Nice. Well, I like it because anything that helps what I'll call the mere mortals of Kubernetes, the people that don't live and breathe in the API and study the source code and understand every configuration option for all the services, there's a lot of people that really just want to use it as a utility and don't really want to have to get that deep, or we don't have the time to get that deep. So
exactly.
I think we really need tools like this to really help us, make sure that we're not doing it wrong and that we don't end up in the headlines.
Yeah, and it's not only for security, it's also for operations, right? One of the biggest I would say, controversy around Kubernetes, or one of the biggest claims against Kubernetes, is the excessive complexity of the system. And sometimes, I like what you just said. Users just want to be users, right? I want to be a Kubernetes user. I don't want to be a Kubernetes expert. I don't want to know the ins and out of it. I don't want to be a Kubernetes developer, right? Just want to be a Kubernetes user. And I think that's what, companies need to try and come up with tools that will help users just be users.
Yeah. Like, this was all a thing many, many years ago. Like, for a Linux example, 20 years ago, to run Linux, you kind of had to become a little bit of an expert. I mean, you
Yeah,
had to
yeah, I
understand
remember that.
drivers. Yeah. You had to understand, I got to get my wireless driver set up because my wireless NIC doesn't work by default. Or my video never worked by default, especially if you had like an NVIDIA graphics card that was fancy. You always had to tweak and customize just to, start. And now we're all used to the fact that, almost on all hardware, most hardware, majority of hardware, you can just install it and it just works, right? Everything works out of the
Yeah.
box, and we're spoiled by that. And I'm looking forward to the day when we can be spoiled by Kubernetes, and these kind of tools are either recommended or come with distributions out of the box. And maybe there's a partnership in your future with some of these distributions, but there's so many,
Yeah,
and they're
they
all
are
so
very.
different.
Some of
Yeah.
them are very good. Yeah, definitely. I remember from my days as a developer, and when we started working with Linux, I don't remember what I was installing, but you used to go over the instruction manual like line by line and make sure that you put the right RPMs in, and everything is kind of like NPMs. Sorry, go in, and then I remember I was going line by line, and then I got an error message. And when I go to the documentation, it says, if you got this error message, something went wrong. You are now on your own. And so there were very different days. Today, it's very hard to, you can't do a product like that today. And Kubernetes
Yeah.
is getting better and better. But I do believe that any tool that creates simplicity and gets to value early and lets you know what's going on is really important.
Yeah. Now, for me, um, I'm going to guess many people, the way they find Armo, your company, is through the Kubescape open source tool. And that was exactly how I did it, right? I stumbled
Mhm.
onto this probably through some site that recommended it, or I probably Googled, Kubernetes security scanners or something like that. And this was years ago. But it's gotten so many new features over the last few years. I'm not sure I can accurately describe all the things it does. Could you give me sort of the elevator pitch of why I would want to look at Kubescape?
Yes, definitely. One of the things that we love about Kubescape is, first of all, how quickly you can get your first value. We can do it even today. 3 to 5 minutes, you get your first cluster scan, you see what's going on, you know where you failed, and you get this initial value very, very, very quickly. And then you can go deeper and deeper into more functionality. And what we figured out and the way we built Kubescape is based on feedback from the community. So, it started with mere configuration scanning, and then users came and said, yes, but can we correlate configuration misconfigurations to vulnerabilities? I have vulnerabilities in my images. Can we correlate them, or can we correlate them to the role-based access control? Or can we scan not only in the cluster? Why can't I scan in my repo? Or when we did vulnerability scanning, why can't we scan them in the repo, in the registry? So it grew and grew, and you know how things are. As you grow, you kind of like get a better vision of your strategy and where you want to go. And as I said, we always wanted to go to end-to-end Kubernetes security. We believe now that one of the basics for a good open source Kubernetes security platform is being a single pane of glass for all of those things. So bringing together misconfigurations, vulnerability scanning, role-based access control, and then on top of them create all kind of, like, we're working on very cool new features like prioritizing the vulnerabilities and the misconfigurations, because as you grow now you have a lot of data and you show a lot of things, but then you get to the second problem where you show so many things which is too much. So now you need to narrow it down with some more insight, and that's where we are today. So it's kind of like this thing that we go back and forth on. But in general, if you ask me what's my kind of like elevator pitch, one sentence is, if you want to get a single pane of glass, a platform to look across your Kubernetes clusters and see where you are, and apply the right, compliance methods to it, and be compliant, this is a very easy way to get started and to get 80% value with 20% of the time.
Nice. Yeah, I know for me, just simply running a tool and getting back a bunch of results, um, it's rare on, I would say, someone who's never scanned anything in their cluster or never had an audit or anything like that. It's rare to come back with all greens. So you people out there, don't
Yeah.
get your hopes up. I mean, most of the time when I scan a cluster that I built, it's got a bunch of warnings and
Well,
so
just by default. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
yeah.
you're
But
completely
it's a
right.
great learning, even if it's just a sample cluster, even if you're someone who's just running Docker desktop locally or whatever. I would advocate for tools like this because uh, you learn so much through just the simple, like you said, the single pane of glass reporting back on the status of all the things. And I sort of learned by doing it wrong, running scans, right? And then, of course, you will hear me on this show talk about linting. I lint all the things. I lint all the YAML. Um, the Docker files are linted. I those tools as well also teach me. And this, I feel like it does a little bit of linting in the YAML, doesn't it? Doesn't it have some view of what your YAML for your resources are?
Yeah, it shows you the YAML. It will show you. So, for example, if you fail in a certain configuration, it will pinpoint you to the actual line where the misconfiguration has happened, and will give you a tooltip about what you need to change. And this is something that is also, if we think about our roadmap and where we want to take this platform, um, being better in remediation is a big part of it. Being able to not only pinpoint you and show you what is wrong, maybe also fix it for you, show you a fixed version, allow you to create a pull request and commit it directly to your GitHub to solve it in your CI/CD. So those are the things that we are always looking, into adding into the product. So that's one big theme. Remediation is a big theme. Prioritization is another big theme for us, where we think the value really lies.
Yeah. And so we talk about Kubescape, the open source tool, and then how does ARMO, the company, relate to that?
So we are the company behind. We started a Kubescape. If you look at, for example, if you look at the number of contributors for Kubescape, I think today we have about 50 something. We can check the GitHub soon, but we have about 50 something, 50 to 60 different contributors. About, let's say, 20 from them are from ARMO. And naturally, the ARMO contributors are much more meaningful, and the number of commits that they do, is much higher. And we do much significant contributions. But we started the project, and with the notion that the way we're gonna work is we're gonna put this project out there. We're gonna make it completely open. We are also contributing it to the CNCF in the next few months, and it's going to be an independent project. And the way we work is that we have our own SaaS version. It's the same Kubescape engine, but we've created a SaaS platform around it that will basically make it easier for you to install, operate, maintain, things like single sign-on that you would need as a bigger company, things like collaboration between employees and between team members, assigning issues, things like workflows. So those are the things that we wrap around Kubescape in our SaaS platform. And the idea is that, if you're an organization and you want to install it yourself, it's self-sufficient. You can install it, you can run it, and you can get the same value on your own. If you want the support, if you want, not to need to install the backend and to manage, Elastic and installing Elastic and configuring Elastic and data retention and all of that, you can work with us in our managed service. And also that, by the way we work, we feel we need to let you experiment and fall in love with the product before we ask you for anything. So we have a freemium model where the complete functionality, we don't differentiate The complete functionality is available for free up to the first 10 worker nodes. So you can use it, you can try it on a small cluster or a few clusters. And then, if you decide you like it and you want to use it in a larger scale, that's where we start to engage with you commercially.
Nice. I didn't know about that free offering. I'm going to have to check that out. So one of the things I think a lot you mentioned when we were talking before the show and we were sort of writing up some of the things over the last few weeks about how we're going to do this. One of the things you mentioned was sort of the false assumption that DevOps doesn't care about security. And of course, I identify with that because my whole career, I've never been a dedicated security engineer, but I always felt like the security of my solutions and my systems was my job. Like it was not the job of the security team to tell me my stuff was insecure. It was my job to learn from them and to do all that stuff. So I would go out and get security certifications, not because I wanted to have a job in the security team. It was just like I felt like that was part of what my job was to make it safe. And one of the things on the Kubescape GitHub repo, it mentions the NSA CISA and the MITRE attack frameworks, I think is what you call them. And I don't think these things are well known. So could you take a minute real quick just to educate our audience about what these things are, these organizations even do, and why does it matter that your scanner uses them?
Yes. Then thank you for bringing this up. First of all, about the misconception of DevOps not liking security, or don't caring about security.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a misconception because every DevOps person I speak with, my experience is that they care about security and they know security very well. And I'll go even one step further to say that the level of discussion of security with these guys is many times even deeper than the one you have with security officials, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a technical discussion and not a compliance discussion. And
Yeah.
I think, I don't want to insult anyone, but I think DevOps people, they don't like security people. It's not that they don't like security. Okay? They don't like.
It feels like a bumper sticker.
It's like they don't like that someone from the top comes to them and say, do we do this? Do we do that? And usually they say, yeah, we do this. And they're usually very much on top of their game. Now, I think that where the I would say the gap that anyone needs to bridge between security and between DevOps and security people is many times it's a gap of terminology and language and the way they look at the world, because the DevOps people, they don't speak the same language as the security people. And that's exactly where NSA and the MITRE attack frameworks come into play, because NSA, National Security Agency, they came up with a framework to look at Kubernetes cluster security, and they call it the Kubernetes hardening guidelines. And they came up with that. And this is a document that is meant for security, and it speaks security language. It puts it into security language in terms of the chapters and the different things you need to check. And the same is the MITRE attack framework. It's something that came up from the attack chain of Lockheed Martin, and then was adapted in many different ways to many different environments. And Microsoft actually were the ones who created the MITRE attack framework for Kubernetes. Now, what happens there is that now you take tests and you take controls that the DevOps know what they mean. And if you give security, and if you tell security, we looked at the YAML of the deployment and looked at the run as user and looked at the number and it was below 1,000, security people will that's not their language. But if you take that language, which is the language that DevOps are speaking, and you connect it to the NSA guidance, which is the language that security is speaking, this is the magic. That's how you help them communicate, and that's how you help developers basically assure that the cluster is secure, but also communicate it in a very easy way, in a way that the security will understand. If you go a little bit again to what DevOps hate, they hate compliance, right? They hate restrictions. Nobody likes restrictions. And nobody likes to get assigned like boring task of checking this and checking that. And what Kubescape is aiming to do is to give them a very easy way to export that, give it to the security, and bridge that gap of compliance versus actual technology security.
Nice. And MITRE's the company that also manages the vulnerability database, right?
Yes.
So they're kind
They,
of
they,
they're kind of experts.
yeah. They're, of course, they're very well known. We are using their database, of course, as part of our vulnerability scanning.
Yeah.
Um, there are a lot of initiatives right now that are taking place. My director of engineering, Rotem, just had a speech about that in the DevOps conferences, where you want to create databases which are not just vulnerabilities, that they take vulnerabilities and they connect them to misconfigurations and to relevancy and to which packages really actually go to memory and those type of elements. But misconfigurations are the first one that I can think about, because you can think about a vulnerability that requires running as root as in order to be exploited. So
Right.
actually, by fixing the misconfiguration, you can actually many times prevent the vulnerability. So those are relations that do not exist in vulnerability databases, and it's up to us as a community to kind of like bring them together and put them into practice.
Right. And of course, like these buzzwords, I mean, they're not buzzwords, but the buzzwords of the CISA and the MITRE stuff, like that also resonates with the security team because a lot of times those are checkboxes for them, right? Like to have some sort of NSA scan, NSA guidance scan done on infrastructure, because this isn't just for Kubernetes. For those that aren't aware of these kind of frameworks, they're actually very common. We've had them for Docker, we've had them for Linux, we've had them for all sorts of infrastructure over the years, for decades now, where they come out with guidance, particularly NSA, other U.S. government-based entities that come out with these frameworks, and often they're very hard. They're not actually implementation details. Usually, they're very esoteric, and you end up needing a tool like Kubescape to actually figure out if you're following the guidance from these things. So a lot of times, in my experience, when I go to a security team and I say, hey, look, I know you have this audit requirement for an NSA at different levels of the infrastructure. There might be a networking one, there might be a server-based one, whatever. And then I back in the day, this is talking 15, 20 years ago, we would have to do it for like Active Directory and Windows
Yeah,
scans. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So we would have to do this stuff on different levels of infrastructure. So they might not even be aware that this stuff is there for Kubernetes. And, us as DevOps and developer people can just take this to them and say, hey, look, I already got this tool. I've run it. Here's what it reports. I've got work to do. But even if you have work to do, I think that establishes trust with your security team, because it shows them, if you don't already have that strong relationship, it shows them that you care about the security and you want to be open about the security of your solutions to them. Because a lot of times you're saying that back and forth between us and the security team might not always be a two-way open channel. And I always try to bridge that and try to establish that relationships by saying, hey, I've been running this stuff and I want you to know the results and I want you to help me keep track of it, because that's what they're good at, right? They're good at keeping track of things, making sure that stuff is happening. Yeah.
Exactly. This is like music to my ears, right? I mean, I wish all developers were thinking exactly like you. But I think it's also the right thing to do, right? When you collaborate with anyone, it's good to align on the same terminology. It's good to be proactive. It's good to show them, that you're on top of your game in their domain. So it is, super, super important. And also, actually, even if you think about compliance and you think about NSA guidance and security guidance, many times the guidance is not to fix. The
Hmm.
guidance is to know what's going on. Like just knowing that you have this issue, or just knowing or reviewing. So let me give you an example. There is a guidance, right? There is a guidance to minimize the users that you give admin access to. It's probably a best practice in any system, but also in Kubernetes. Now, as a tool, Kubescape or as an auditor, no one knows who really needs to have admin access to your system. But what it can do, it can show you all the users that have and ask you, are these really the ones who need to have, or can we eliminate any? And just looking at that gives you a lot of information as a user, and gives you much more security. And that's actually what the regulator wants you to do. Just look at it and see that it is okay. And also, if it's okay, that's also a lot of value to know and to mark it, because now you create a baseline. And if something changes, we know to tell you, and we know to tell you automatically. So, this is part of the best practice, to share and to know and to understand what's going on in your environment.
Yeah. This is also where I advocate for a GitOps style approach for those of you that haven't seen the 1,000 times on this channel that we talked about GitOps. But essentially, the idea is that your developers and possibly even your admins don't have direct access to the cluster, that if they're wanting to change anything, they have to put their YAML in a repo and use a tool like Argo or Flux to implement that, because then that means that you now have this Git log as the record of, oh, I added so-and-so as an admin. They essentially have root. And you can see when that happened and who gave the permissions and who authorized it in the PR. And then developers don't have to learn yet another tool for just controlling the change in Kubernetes. So anyway, just a little PSA there for people. I got to get on my soapbox and say, GitOps the thing.
GitOps, it's a big theme, and it's simple. Well, I think it's hard for some people to get started with, because it's a big task. But once you do it and once it starts running, it makes a lot of things much easier.
Yeah, it definitely removes a lot of burden around having local access on your machine to clusters and worrying about do you have access? Do you have to get on a VPN? Do you have the right certificate? I think you're saying it's a little bit of work up front. Once you've done it a couple of times, you get really used to it, and you sort of have your own, because really all this stuff is just YAML anyway. So whether you're implementing Argo or your own applications or backups, whatever, it's all YAML. You just steal from another repo you have, copy it over, clone it, and then change it a little bit, and now you have a new cluster with all the same setup. So I'd say, the first time or maybe two are really the hard part, and then once you've learned it, you're good to go. So we've got Kubescape, we've got the Argo platform. You want to give us some demos and show us around the ARMO platform a little bit?
Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, but let's do that. So just one thing about GitOps, which is super important.
Yeah.
One of the things we were thinking about when we were thinking about Kubescape is, of course, to make it useful for developers. So one of the things you can do, you can actually create a GitHub action, or you can integrate a Kubescape into your GitOps. And as the commit is done, to get alerted against, the NSA, against the different frameworks or your own framework, if a YAML that is being pushed into your GitOps or a change to your GitOps actually breaks, the policy of your organization or your compliance to the NSA or CIS or any of those.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about Kubescape. Let's do a very short demo. I'm gonna click here to share my screen.
All right. While you're loading that up, Komajaru has a question. How does for Kubescape, how does resources consume while running on Kubernetes environments? Does it run? So that's why I guess one question. And the other one is, does it run or support cloud and on-prem and hybrid platforms on Kubernetes?
Yeah, so the answer is that it is very flexible. You can choose how to run Kubescape. One way is to run it as a CLI tool on your own machine or any machine that has access via API to the cluster. It will just run through the cluster API and give you the report and that's what I'm going to show you in a minute. It's the quickest way to do it. But another way to do it, which is more extensive, starts to give you to save the history as well and show you drifts in your posture, is to basically use, it's not an operator, but it's like an operator, basically install a couple of pods in our namespace, the Kubescape namespace in your cluster. It will run there and it will send, the results either to Prometheus if you're using the open source or to our SaaS. If you're using the SaaS platform, you can see everything there.
Nice.
Um, so usually people get to just like you, they get to Kubescape. Usually they get to the GitHub page, and they learn about the project and they want to get started. There's a lot of information here. As I said, we have about like 63 contributors to date. We are looking for contributors. If you would like to join a growing open source project as a contributor and even a maintainer, we are very much open to it. We will give you everything you need to get started, and we have in our issues and the NPRs, they're all tagged around which are the easiest place to get started and stuff like that. So hopefully it's quite easy to get started. You can start with the small things and then go forward from there. We would really appreciate it. We have this. Let me show you. We have this Kubescape swag store. When you can, as you contribute more to our project, we will give you points, and you can use those points to actually buy Kubescape merchandise. Like T-shirts, hats, stickers. The stickers are very, very popular. So that this is just part of being a developer, and we just feel it's cool to give
Yeah,
points and to let people do that. So that's
that's a nice
just so
that's a
you
nice
know,
program.
join us.
It's kind of putting
But
your it's kind of putting your money where your mouth is at. It's like we're not just asking for your free contributions for open source, but we'll also give you some swag along the way. That's nice.
yeah, exactly. It's and the thing about this swag store is like it's just easy. We're not gonna you just go and pick it up. You don't send us an email. Just start working, and it's just very easy and super cool in my mind. But to get started, let's do that. You go to the CLI. You have this command where you have our install script, basically taking a Kubescape latest version directly from GitHub and running the install script. Usually that's how people start. And I have a cluster here, like a GCP cluster that I think is connected. Yeah, here it is, Shauli 1. I'm going to connect to it. And then I'm just going to paste the installation of Kubescape here.
Does Zoom work in there at all? It's a little small for me.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, here we go.
Look at that. Yeah. I haven't tried Zoom in
So,
the cloud IDE for Google Cloud, but
yeah,
it works.
I was kind of worried to try, but it worked. Yeah. So yeah, we have here, and now I'm just going to run Kubescape scan. I'm going to use the framework NSA. That's it. Let's just run it like that. And basically, this is the CLI version, so nothing is installed in the cluster. I basically get started directly from the API, run against the API, and get the report. Now, because of the zoom, it looks a little bit. Let's try to unzoom it for a minute. And yeah, you can see
There
you
you go.
get all of the resources and all of the tests running. And I used like the summarized version. If you use Verbers, you will get exactly, which resources failed which tests and why they failed. Everything is available here, but is also available in the UI. I'm going to show it to you in the UI just because it is easier. You usually get a link here at the end where you can use to sign up to our SaaS, and then if you run scans, by default we don't upload them, but if you sign up to the SaaS and then run a scan, then we will upload it. And then basically what you're going to get to is you're going to get to here, which is our scans. And we scan your cluster and your YAMLs against different frameworks. And we talked a lot about the NSA framework, so this is it. And you have here all of the controls. Every control that failed, you can see which resources failed that specific control and the severity of that control. Let's just take an example. I have a pretty secured cluster, but let's look at this, for example, a privileged container. Everybody knows that it's a bad practice to run privileged containers, right? So I'm going to look here and I'm going to see I have 7 privileged containers running in my environment. Not very good, I think, but I'm going to look at it. Well, as I look at it, I see that actually all of the containers that are running as privileged are actually kube system containers that need to run as privileged containers. So it's actually something that I need to approve. We talked about it earlier. As you remember that, part of compliance is to know that things are running as privilege and they should run as privilege. So in this case, I can just mark it here as okay and not not be alerted about it again. And now from now on, I will only see changes in this compliance control. But just to show how it will look like, so if I go to this pod, let's say it wasn't the kube proxy GKE, and we talked earlier about seeing the actual code, so I can see the actual YAML that has been deployed for this resource, and I know it has the privilege container in it. And if I go to line 43, it shows me exactly the line where the privilege true exists and tells you what you need to check. So remove privilege capabilities. You can download the YAML. In future version, you will have a fixed version here, and you will be able to create a pull request directly backed to your GitHub repository. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's actually, I was kind of answering my own little question there was, over time, how do I trim down or accept alerts? And so essentially in the background, your platform is keeping track of those changes. So would it alert me again? Yeah, like, so if I change those pods to new images or different images, would it alert me later because there's a change, that kind of thing, when I scan again?
Yeah, it will show that there was a change. And for example, if you have a new container that is run as privileged and you didn't look and you didn't approve, it will give you an alert that you need to check it, and you need to check that there is a drift, there is a security drift in your organization. We also have repository scan, which basically helps you can actually scan the repository before, so you have your clusters and you have your code. And what we are now doing, we can actually now correlate between what happens in your repository and what's happening in your cluster. So for example, we talked about GitOps. If someone changes something in the repository, we will tell you, look, there is a change here that is going to, the outcome of that change is going to get to that cluster and into that workload. Do you want to check it now before it gets to runtime? So that's another thing that we are doing quite a bit.
Nice. We have a question. We have a question. Yeah. Maybe not exactly to this particular part of the demo, but someone sure has another one that asks how compatible Kubescape is with storage, networking tools, plugins, which are attached to Kubernetes clusters like Linkerd, Rook, etc.
Yeah. So it will Kubescape will treat them as pods. Okay, and it will scan them that just like any other pod, just like it did with the Kube system. So that's the way it will treat them.
Yeah, so it's looking for things like privilege mode, any sort of security settings that are maybe not recommended defaults, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes. Because we don't have a lot of time, I just want to let's see just one more thing. Another very popular control is application credential in configuration files, basically identifying, if we have secrets, unencrypted secrets in the configuration files. This is something which is quite popular, allow privilege escalation, etc. And another thing that we find very, very useful to our users is the RBAC visualizer, the role-based access control visualizer. This is something that came directly from the community asking for it. And whenever we go to a new cluster and whenever a user sees this map for the first time, they don't believe that they have so many roles and role binding in their environment. You usually think, I probably have 5 different roles, but just by default, the GKE will put 15 roles, and any operator you install puts its own role, right? We do it as well, right? You put Kubescape will create a role for itself, and usually these things stack up quite significantly and create a mess that's quite extensive. So we created this to help you visualize and understand what's going on in your system. And if you use it just like that with the full visualization, because it is so complex, you can zoom in and see different things, but it is still quite complex. So what we did, we created ability. We have 3 ways to investigate basically and to get better understanding of what's going on. One is the pre-built queries. So the pre-built queries are basically queries that we thought and that we heard from the community that are interesting, and we do automatically for you. So, let's look at a very show subject with privilege on all resources. Okay. For example, this is a very common thing because this relates to excessive privileges, right? You don't want too many subjects to have that type of privilege. Or if you want to see, let's take another one, show the cluster admin, of course, and we can see that there is one cluster admin here, and we can see that the system masters is attached to it, but also the storage, the system storage from GKE. No, I don't know, not sure we need that, but that's another way you can look at that. Another very popular one is unassigned roles. Let's see if I see it here. I don't see it right now. The service account with no workloads, also not a very good practice, but there are quite a bunch of those. Another way to go about it is the who can. Basically, a very basic way to investigate. You can do who can perform a verb on a resource, right? Very clear. Who can create, let's say, secrets, or I don't know, events. And you just run it, and it will give you the query of that. Specifically here, we don't have a result. And you can do investigate. Investigate basically gives you full control on what you want to look at. The example that I usually start with is I want to start with secrets. Let's investigate what happens with secrets in my organization. So I'm going to start with the resource, which is called secret. And now I can basically crawl the graph from here. So I can see all the roles that can actually access a secret. And these are all the roles. And I can choose a role and see the resources, the other resources that he has. Or if there is a subject, let's see, show the subject of that role. So this is a way to kind of like investigate and deep dive and understand what's going on in my role-based access control. I hope it makes sense. I hope you find it useful. By the way, if you have thoughts, anyone here in the audience, anyone who has a thought about improving, please put an issue on GitHub. We would really, really love, to get engaged and get some thoughts on everything that I show you here.
Yeah. And a similar question to some of these queries you're looking at. Another question coming in: can we customize or refine the scans according to project names or by namespace inventory?
Yes. So what you can do is you can create a custom configuration. Let's just go here. In the framework, you can create what we call a customize your own framework. And basically you can create a framework and for anything, like for a specific namespace or for a specific cluster, and then run it on that cluster. So it's quite easy to do. You enter the framework name, you put some kind of description, and then you choose the controls that you want to attach to that framework. I hope it answers the questions. Another way to use the frameworks is, sometimes when you want to enforce something. So for example, let's say I want to create a GitHub action that will basically not allow a developer to commit a YAML into the GitHub with excessive privileges. Let's say with run as privilege equals true. I can create a framework with that control or a few of those controls, put it as a GitHub action, and use the result of that scan to reject the commit. So that's another way to use the frameworks.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm all about a GitHub action. That's my platform of choice for any of the automation. So that makes me interested.
Yeah, I love GitHub actions.
Yeah.
It's just so practical.
Yeah, Maz has a question real quick. Does Kubescape's operator support scanning container images, which we haven't talked a lot about, but you have mentioned several times? Does it support scanning container images of the deployment, and can Kubescape prevent that deployment if there is a critical or high vulnerability?
Okay, that's a very good question. So the first answer is yes. We have the image scanning. We have the image scanning here. which basically scans all of the images in your clusters, shows you the number of critical, high, and medium vulnerabilities in the cluster. You can actually filter it by the number of by only those who have fixes, and also RCEs. RCEs, remote control remote code executions, which we feel are even more critical because if it's open to the internet, it can be exploited remotely. And you have all of that. And then what you can do, you can actually choose to add actually registry scanning. So to scan that image in the registry when it gets to the registry before it gets deployed. And as of policies, you can create policies that will alert you and add them to your GitOps. At this point today, we don't have an admission controller that will look at that and prevent it, but this is something that we will probably add in the near future.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking to myself while you were talking about it, how you would do that, because like to me, I'm thinking, okay, normally if I'm doing what I would call like sort of proper GitOps approaches, I would have a YAML file somewhere. Maybe it's a customized, maybe it's a Helm chart, and I'm updating the image version. And that repo, while maybe being scanned, doesn't actually contain the images necessarily. So how would it know to scan those images? Yeah. So that's an interesting. But admission controller. Yeah, admission controller would be the last, the final step, I suppose. Yeah.
Admission controller will be the last step, but admission controller is also, in some cases a little, can be considered intrusive, and in some cases, might be considered a little bit too late. What you can do is, because we have this code section here, you can attach your repositories. It's not configured here in my system, but it can attach that repository that you just spoken about, that has the YAMLs, and you can have your registries scanned on an ongoing basis. And then what you can do, you can create a control, let's say in your GitHub, in your Git options, that will basically look back into the registry scanning that we have into the image and see if it has critical vulnerability, for example, and alert you that you're using an image that in the registry, like basically this is where the connection is happening between the repository and the registry. Am I making sense?
Yeah. It's like you're saying. It almost could be two steps, because an admission controller that requires the image to have, let's say, no critical or high vulnerabilities or whatever. To me, that kind of implies now that my mission controller is now kicking off an image scan. If it doesn't exist, that could be a problem. That could add delays.
Exactly.
So yeah, I kind of want it earlier. This is actually, to me, the argument for GitOps, because I don't want people directly applying resources to my cluster. I want them to go through a standard PR process. And I honestly, in all of the clients over the last 2 years that I've worked with, all the projects I've been on, our goal has always been that the PR process for changing the manifest YAML, that is where we're changing the image versions and the image names themselves or whatever. And those PRs are running all the GitHub actions or whatever your CI tool is. And that's what's telling us, hey, this has different vulnerabilities. This one has additional vulnerabilities. This has not just image vulnerabilities, but maybe I'm doing like code QL or code scanning for quality of code, and I'm doing all that stuff in the PR, and that all happens before Kubernetes is ever talked to. Like that's really the whole shift left focus of what we're trying to get out of last second, because that's the problem, right? In this case, the security team could have approved it. Everybody, if it were just relying on an admission controller, all of a sudden now where everything's happening, and then finally on the day we think we're launching this new update, it's denied by the cluster, and we're surprised because we didn't scan ahead of time, and that's what we try to prevent, right? Like, but I could also see paranoid teams, appropriately paranoid, that want that that final blockage just to absolutely prevent.
It's again a little bit of a different mindset between the DevOps mindset and the security mindset, right? A security engineer or a security architect, or I don't know, someone where security is the main thing for them, they will say, okay, give me a solution that will just prevent anything privileged going into my cluster. Put a gate. Say security people, they think in gates, right? Put a gate, and admission controller is exactly that. Where more of like a DevOps CI/CD continuous integration GitOps person would think, okay, how do I put it into my process in order to prevent it earlier? Now, eventually you might need both, because the security person will just not believe that your GitOps is good enough to prevent it,
Yeah.
and it will want that gate. So that's a balance that you're going to need to keep.
Yeah. I think I missed in your demo real quick. Just one question I had. Can
Yeah.
you make those scans recurring, like once every day or
Yeah.
something like that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because
you can choose as a user by default. By the way, it will do it once a day. That's kind of like the default configuration. It's a basic run job, but you can edit that either via the UI or via deploying another YAML for the cron job.
yeah, and that's part of the challenge of a lot of this. There's these tools are making it so much better than we used to have, but there's this subtle complexity because none of this code is static, right? So you and I will probably have a conversation then where we say, well, this is all, we can have the GitOps approach, we can have the mission controller, but that's just day one. So your code goes into the server, and let's say it's only updated once a month. Well, over that month, there's new vulnerabilities, and that code may get less secure, or well, it will get less secure over time. And having something like this where it's scanning the actual clusters daily or whatever will help you understand that, oh, I actually have code that was fine when we ran it, when we launched it, but now there's dependencies that have new vulnerabilities I didn't know about. And a lot of times our GitOps processes won't cover for that. So this is a great example of how tools like this that are constantly reevaluating over time, not just when it's first created. That's actually pretty important to a lot of teams.
Yes.
And it's subtly missed. Like a lot of people don't realize that that's a gap they have.
I'll give you an even more simple example, if I may, which is, let's say you didn't change anything in your code, but new vulnerabilities get found every day. So when you scanned the image a week ago, the same image, same code, you didn't touch it. You scan it again after a month, it has critical vulnerability. It also read it a month ago, but just no one knew about it back then, and the
Right.
vulnerability has been found, right?
That's right.
So yeah, this is another thing that comes over time. The actual vulnerability database, we talked about the Midway database. The database itself is dynamic and changes every day. So that's
Yeah.
another thing to take into consideration.
Yeah, it's always evolving. Basically, even if we didn't change any of our software, we're still going to have work to do. Which
Exactly.
is there's going to be new work.
You're gonna get paid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. One last question. We're a little over time. Can we
Sure.
scan artifacts with and maintainers code with the dependencies run on the DevOps pipeline platform? I'm not sure if I
Wow.
understand that question.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure. Can you say a little bit more about the topic,
Yeah.
or can you ask it in a different way? Because I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah. Well, in the ARMO tool, when you scan repositories, are you scanning the YAML of that repository? What are you scanning in that repository?
YAMLs, Helm, it depends on what's in the inventory, but we support Helms and YAMLs.
Okay, so you're not like doing a package JSON scan or,
No,
yeah,
not at this
yeah,
point. Not
yeah.
at
So
this point.
that's a code scanning tool, not necessarily
Exactly.
what we're
That's
talking.
kind
Yeah,
of like that's more for Sneak.
yeah.
They have their own business.
That's right. That's a great question. Thanks for all the questions, everyone. This has been great because I was very curious about this tool and particularly the platform. And you said free to sign up for 10 nodes. Is that right?
Yes, up to 10 worker nodes.
Yeah, awesome. Look for my sign up soon. I'm gonna have to have it for my demos, and I mean, I don't have any really large projects of my own, but I do advise customers and clients a lot, so I at least want to know what the tools. And I actually have a couple of projects right now where they're just getting started with Kubernetes, and they're trying to figure out exactly where they need certain scans and certain audits, and they're a financial institution, so they're very concerned about that stuff. So I know that they already run Kubescape in their GitHub Actions against the YAML. I don't think they run it against the clusters yet, though. So, yeah.
Probably not. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the show. People can get started by going to your site. That's let me just bring these up real quick so we all remember. We're talking about armosec.io, right? I'll put that in chat.
And again,
And
also contributors. You wanna join the community, you wanna start contributing, join our GitHub. You can see there's a lot of activity going on there. We have a Discord channel, super active. Your Discord is very active when your users are starting to answer questions of other users and you not answer them yourself. So it's fluidly happening. So join the conversation there. Anyone who wants to join, I'm sure you'll find the answers you need.
yeah, I love Discord. It's my favorite community platform. And that's great that you have a nice community growing there. Well, thank you so much, Shauli, for being on the show all the way from across the pond. Sorry we couldn't meet up when I was over there a couple of months ago. Didn't get to tour all of Europe and the Middle East and everywhere. But that's another trip we'll have to make. Maybe at a KubeCon.
Definitely.
Are you going to be in Detroit? Are you all going to make it to Detroit?
Oh yeah, definitely. Come to our booth. We're gonna have an I don't want to spoil it. If I would tell you what we're gonna have, my VP marketing and business development is gonna be pissed at me. So you need to come.
All right. So you heard it here. Pro tip: if you're going to be at KubeCon, go to the ARMO booth, and there might be a surprise there. I will be definitely stopping by and saying hi.
T-shirt in the conference guaranteed.
Oh, wow. Well, we're going to have to get a selfie in the real world if you're going to be there. Yeah, so this will be great. But thanks again, everyone, for watching. Next week, we've got more people coming to the show. Let's see, what's on the list? We've got future shows. Oh, Liz Rice is coming on the show next week with we're going to talk about open source and security, all things Liz Rice. She's been on the show before several times. I'm excited to have her back. Then after that, if you're someone who's taken my courses, we will have the monthly live Q&A for all the Udemy stuff. And then after that, we've got Service Mesh coming up for Kubernetes with Lee Calcote and Nick Jackson. They're going to be on to talk about service meshery and all these other things. And then Rosemary Wang is back on the show from HashiCorp talking about Nomad and other tools from Hashi. I mean, who doesn't know a HashiCorp tool? Like they have a bunch of great tools. So we're going to have them on the show. But thanks again for being here, and we will see you next week on YouTube Live. Ciao, everybody.
Cheers. Thank you so much.